Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of Becoming a Gibborim. This is part 16, and today, guess what? We're talking all about covenants of death, Hades, destruction, violence, the way the enemy seeks to devour you, how he devours us, and, of course, probably going to talk about some knives, stone axes that saved my soul, and the power of restoration. Yes, we'll see if I actually can get to every single one of those things. But I had a moment of time today because I actually got a fellowship. I got to spend some time with some other people that love this. If you know what this is, the sword of awesomeness is how I've referred to it. I think the Book of the Covenant might be far more powerful, or the sword of the covenant, because if you don't know about what this is, that's okay. It's time to learn. It's the literal way to cut yourself free from the bindings of total despair and hopelessness, as much as it is the way for you to escape the fears that have so easily beset you. That means you're all basically living in terror most of the time. You act out of those decisions because your soul has been captured. You have been taken captive up here. In your mind, your will, your emotions, that's your soul. You've been taken captive, wholeheartedly so. And because of that, it's very likely that you are totally ensconced in the way of the other enemy's team. There's lots of different enemies out there, first of all. I'm going to do some very intentional differentiation between who is the bad guys and who's the righteous one. Because becoming a Gibborim, as much as this series is talking about how we ourselves become mighty, the end of the day of all of this study that we're going to do is that there is one real Gibborim. El Gibborim is how he's referred to even. There is one truly mighty one, and we're going to talk all about him because he has done things that are absolutely impossible, like actually impossible, things that could never be done by a man individually until he showed up. And he was tested and tried and tempted and sought to be devoured, destroyed. He was torn asunder physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, to such an extent that he was no longer even recognizable as a human. Think about that. Have you ever been beaten so severely that you no longer were recognizable as a human? Did that. That was on his checklist of things he must endure in order to do something so magnificent that it was irrevocably fantastic. It's something that caused change to be authored into the story. It's very rare that you go along in a story and you see cataclysmic changes suddenly seize a character like the living son of Elohim. Change happened in such an extensive way that the world itself, the foundational understandings of the world's systems were changed irrevocably. They never went back to being the way they were. The entire history of man has been referenced off of his life. I know they tried to change that. That's no big surprise because there's one who's going to come and change times and seasons, remember? They've been talking about him for a while. If you haven't read 1 John, memorize it. Don't just read it, memorize it. Eat it like it was more important than everything else you've stuffed in your face recently because it's going to sustain you. 1 John is one of the most foundationally important books you can ever know. It's one of those living words that came because John, remember, another Gibborim, who was so Gibborimed, he was so mighty, he got to write some of the most pronounced declarations of victory and deliverance that have ever been authored in the history of mankind. Revelation was not the last book written. Do you know that? 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, those were the last books that we were written in the basic canonized text that we use today. Those books, it was almost as if John had this idea that, okay, I just gave you guys some pretty rough news when it came to the tribulations ahead of you. That being said, let me tell you kind of a battle strategy to how to be effective amidst it. That's what 1 John is. 1 John should be so fundamentally critical to your life that it is in you, it is on you, it is a part of your mindset because there's so much richness in there. But I don't know how much of 1 John I'm going to be able to get to today because I've got a lot of stuff I want to talk about today, which means those of you guys that have just like click frenzy and you have a, let me just say it nicely, you have a bad case of scoliosis. Do you know what scoliosis is? That's because, okay, when you jump on those apps and you get thumb happy and you just start scrolling, that's a case of scoliosis, and your diagnosis is terminal because there is a real, literal thief who is here to kill, steal, and destroy. And for some of you, he doesn't try to take your hours. He doesn't try to take your days, your weeks, your months, your years. He just tries to steal your minutes. He tries to steal your minutes because you lack discipline. You lack discipline, so instead of doing the things that would be beneficial, perpetually beneficial, like life-giving things, like advancing the kingdom, no matter what, like advancing and ministering and reading the book that we are talking about, the Sword of the Covenant, instead of reading that, you get scoliosis because it's easier, and we're generally cowards. We generally don't like to do the things that are difficult because we lack discipline. I went through basic combat training, which was designed by very intelligent humans, and I think a lot of spiritual forces from the kingdom of death. We're going to talk about him. He's an entity. They orchestrated ways to take a human and transform them into a soldier who would obey orders, who would They would obey orders predominantly, that they would then uphold that which they have been commanded to do to such an extent that they were dependable to accomplish the mission, to serve their country, whatever the ideological thing they're trying to shift into you, but that you would accomplish the mission no matter what, that you would be successful even unto death with which you were entrusted with, which whatever you were commissioned to go forth and do. And they were master strategists who laid out a way of dismantling the systems that have been laid up within each and every one of us to give us a civilian mindset, to give us a belief of comfortability as our king. Comfortability coincides, unfortunately, with cowardice. People that seek convenience and comfortability tend to almost always be cowards when they're tested. And that's just reality, because what they've lacked most sincerely is discipline. And the real training camp that I feel like I've learned to become a soldier much more extensively in was not necessarily the United States Army. It's been in the land of farming. I mean that. Parenthood and farming, to me, are exponentially more effective at equipping me to be an effective soldier than anything I ever went through during my time in the military, by far. And I say that because when I was in the military and I was fatigued, like really tired, exhausted beyond measure, it was basically 3.5 months in like a never-ending state of sleep deprivation. I do not recall a single instance where I got more than 3.5, maybe on a rare occasion 4 hours of sleep. That's not together, right? Because you would have night watch and fire guard, and you had all these different duties that you had to do at night, because they were designing a system to shatter you. They were designing a system to break you down into fragmented pieces with which to sift through to find the pieces and the bits that they needed to make an effective soldier. Okay, they wanted to discard the rest. And the way you can do that very effectively is sleep deprivation. Well, you know what was interesting? My training ended. And after my training ended, I tended to get more sleep, like a lot of sleep. Like I tried to sleep as long as I could for a long time after that. And I was able to do that. Parenting is like basic combat training, except it does not ever stop. Not even a little bit. It is ongoing, perpetual sleep deprivation. My wife and I have never been more fatigued in the history of our known lives. 2 babies, one moving about with rapidity, running around, jumping around, getting wildly enthused about goats right now and livestock, which is fantastic. But the other one is crawling around and trying to shove everything she can in her mouth, which is a very trying time for parents because you have to be so hyper vigilant all the time, or you just got to carry a 17-pound baby perpetually in your arms. It weighs more than my M16A2 rifle did, and my body armor's basic front chest armor was combined. She's like that, and I have to wear her all the time, and I don't have a sturdy sling to put on her because she tends to wiggle right out of it. That's okay. There's baby carriers and there's different systems that help, but I am physically broken down all the time. And then you want to add to that farming. Let's go do manual labor tasks like building fencing all day, while sometimes holding or wearing a baby, and then build fires and bonfires, and then wrangle goats, and then try to water and get food. And it's just a never-ending thing. It's way more intense than basic combat training ever was for me. But you know what I've realized? It makes me disciplined. It makes me very dependent on a supernatural strength that I did not have within myself up until this time. I didn't even recognize how much I needed that until I was dependent on it. And this is amazing because I am going through trials of a different kind than I did before. And that's valuable because, see, Deuteronomy, let's just read something, okay? I didn't even think I was going to go here. Let's go back to the beginning. Remember, the first 5 books of the scripture of the Sword of the Covenant are foundational. Without them, everything else makes no sense whatsoever because the book of the covenant is all about covenants. If you don't know about covenants, it's because you've not read the front of the book. So, Deuteronomy is also so full of Gibborim stories, it will make your blood so full of piss and vinegar, you'll need to, very quickly, go destroy something that was terrible and build something fantastic in its place. All right, the book of Deuteronomy, Chapter 8. If you haven't read Deuteronomy 8, it should be your assigned reading list as well. 1 John, Deuteronomy, get after it. All right, you ready for this? All right. All the commandments that I am commanding you today, you shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply, and go in and possess the land which Yahweh swore to give your fathers. You shall remember all the way which Yahweh, your Elohim, has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that he might humble you, testing you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. He humbled you and let you be hungry and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you understand that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh. Your clothing did not wear out on you, nor did your foot swell these 40 years. Thus you are to know in your heart that Yahweh, your Elohim, was disciplining you, just as a man disciplines his son. Therefore you shall keep the commandments of Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in his ways and to fear him. For Yahweh your Elohim is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs flowing forth in valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land where you'll eat food without scarcity, in which you will not lack anything, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. When you have eaten and are satisfied, you shall bless Yahweh your Elohim for the good land which he has given you. Beware that you do not forget Yahweh your Elohim by not keeping his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes which I am commanding you today. I have been disciplined by the Father. He has sent me out into the wilderness in such a strategically important way because he loves me. He loves me. I was raised in a home where death was authorized, where death was given reign, where death was given a supreme seat at the table perpetually. There was generations of iniquity that had been building up a stronghold in my family's heart. I had come to know that as a system of life. I thought that was normal. I thought that was foundationally important in order for me to go forward. The wilderness has been a time where he stripped me of that, where I forsook that home, where I forsook that family, where I forsook that way of living and set myself on a path to where my Father, my Heavenly Father, would lead me. And he led me out into a land where I was troubled, where I have been afflicted, where my wife and my daughters and I, we have known scarcity, we have known lack, we have known what it is to be so utterly dependent on him that we have nothing else apart from him, our home, and the family that we have with us at that moment. We've had no other known means of provision apart from what he chooses to provide to us at that time. And in that, I have seen he tests us. He tests us. He stretches us. He stretches us to the point of our absolute breaking because he wants to see, after it all is said and done, after you've been really shaken, after you've really worn yourself out, have you found what is left in you? What is the remnant of your soul What is remaining within you? Have you given everything? And what is it that you cling to? What is it that you grab onto? What is it that you hold onto? Because a lot of you don't even have the discipline to listen through a 30-minute teaching on the word of Elohim without finding something else to satisfy your scratching, itching ears and your insatiable eyes. You have created and conditioned yourself to the thievery of the systems of man. You have been conditioned to lack discipline, to sit and read and study the word, or to even pray without ceasing, to pray diligently, to intercede for those who are in desperation, crying out, hungry to know that there is a power available to them that is limitless, that is ever-present and never going to diminish. There are people every day who wake up begging the creator of the heavens and the earth to answer them. And you were custom created. You were set here, set apart for such a time as this, to be the body that answers the prayer. There's so much mightiness that is waiting to be done in us and through us. But if we do not have discipline, we cannot achieve it. We cannot take hold of it. We cannot seize it, first of all. But we cannot even recognize it to seize it in the first place. We must be able to learn how to test between that which is good and that which is evil. And the way you do that is you must bind the influences of the enemy, constrict them, forbid to allow them the authority to exercise their dominion in your life anymore. The way you can do that was impossible for thousands of years. It was impossible from the garden, more or less. You could not do it. There was a supernatural act that needed to take place, and it happened later on in the story, okay? Well, it happened much earlier, because it does say that Jesus, Yeshua, the Messiah, was the lamb who was slain before the foundations of the world. So really, the redemption that was authorized for us took place immediately, before there was even the brokenness within the system. But if you haven't read recently Hebrews 2, incredible passage. Sorry, I'm blurping out here a little bit of Monte. All right, you ready for this? Let's jump in. This is Hebrews 2. Okay, we are going to be going through an understanding of the mechanics of how, first of all, death, Hades, and the dragon are kind of running the scene in so many ways for a long time. They've been having dominion. They've been having the authority over most of the souls of mankind for a long time. And one of the most important things for you to understand is that the dragon, the devil, okay, he's often referred to as Satan in the scriptures. Revelation 12 tells us he is the dragon. So I refer to him as the dragon that he is. He had the power over death. Now, that's very important because death's an entity, remember? And if you had the authority over him, you could choose what he did with what he had in his house. All right, hold on. I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, you ready for this? I'm just going to read the chapter because it's so mighty. All right, for this reason, we must pay much closer attention to what we have heard so that we do not drift away from it. For if the words spoken through angels proved unalterable, and every transgression and disobedience received a just penalty, how will we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? After it was at the first spoken through Yahweh, it was confirmed to us by those who heard, Yahweh also testifying with them, both by signs and by wonders and by various miracles and by the gifts of the Holy Spirit according to his own word. For he did not subject to angels the world to come concerning that which we are speaking. But one has testified, saying, what is man that you remember him? Or the Son of Man that you are concerned about him? You have made him for a little while lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, and have appointed him over the works of your hands, and you have put all things in subjection under his feet. For in subjecting all things to him, he left nothing that is not subject to him. But now we do not yet see all the things subjected to him, but we do see him who was made for a little while lower than the angels, namely Jesus, because of the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, so that by the grace of Elohim he might taste death for everyone. For it was fitting for him, for whom all things, and through whom are all things, in bringing many sons to glory, to perfect the author of their salvation through sufferings. For both he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified are all from one Father, for which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren, saying, I will proclaim your name to my brethren. In the midst of the congregation I will sing your praise, and again I will put my trust in him. Behold, I and the children whom Elohim has given me. Therefore, since the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise also partook of the same, that through death he might render powerless him who had the power of death, that is, the dragon, and might free those who through fear of death were subject to slavery all their lives. For assuredly he does not give help to angels, but he gives help to the descendants of Abraham. Therefore he had to be made like his brethren in all things, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to Elohim, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For since he himself was tempted in that which he has suffered, he is able to come to the aid of those who are tempted. He rendered powerless. He rendered powerless him who had the power of death, that is, the dragon. He rendered him powerless. Do you believe that? Do you actually believe that? Do you believe that your enemy, the one who prowls around like a roaring lion who seeks to kill, steal, and destroy, has been rendered powerless? Do you believe that? Do you actually live your life as in you do not fear that which is coming? You do not fear the mechanisms of madness that are always being poured out over you. There are systems that are so infectious that have been orchestrated for a very long time to steal your contentment, to steal your peace, to steal your joy, your confidence, your blessed hope. They're all out there waiting to sift you, to grab a hold of you, to turn you this way, to grab your attention and take you this way. They're always waiting to seize you and take from you that which has been given to you, the confidence, the faith that you have been so richly counted as worthy to receive. There is so many snares out there, but they are powerless. Do you understand? They have been rendered powerless by the one who came, who conquered them, who rendered them without things. Okay, you ready? We're going to go to Revelation because it gets even meatier. You ready for this? Oh, this is so good. All right. I just want to read every chapter of the scripture. I actually I'm hungry for the word. I pray every single day that he would give me a hunger for his word, that I would know him more. If you didn't know it, I wrote a book. It's called Snatched from the Flames. The last portion of it, the last words I could possibly leave, I put on a channel. I recorded them. They're called Resources for War. It's a bunch of prayers I put at the end of the book. And these are foundational, important, powerful prayers. And I put them in there. Go listen to it on YouTube if you want to. I would encourage you to just learn how to read and pray for yourself, because nobody else can do that for you like you can do that for you and for the one who loves you and the one you should be in covenant with. Now, this is what it says in here. When I saw him, I fell at his, this is Jesus, Yeshua, the ascended master of creation, now standing there in full glory, like not even a little bit diminished. He is like, his head and his hair were white, like white wool, like snow, and his eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze when it has been made to glow in a furnace. And his voice was like the sound of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and out of his mouth came a sharp, 2-edged sword, and his face was like the sun shining in its strength. When I saw him, I fell at his feet like a dead man. And he placed his right hand upon me, saying, Do not be afraid. I am the first, and I am the last, and the living one. And I was dead, And behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death, and I have the keys of Hades. He has the keys of death. He has the keys of Hades. That is how he rendered powerless the devil, okay? When he descended off of the cross, voluntarily, by the way, he gave himself up. When he did that, he went down to the deepest parts of the earth, and he stole back that which had been taken, that power that the dragon once had. The keys of death and Hades is what made the dragon so powerful. Do you get this? This is the root source of the enemy's power, okay? Death and Hades, they are where so much of the power source of the kingdom of darkness has flown from. But we serve El Gibbor, the Gibborim, who has the key of David upon his shoulder, the keys of death and the keys of Hades. He has rendered our enemy powerless. He has defeated them who had been indefeatable up until this point in time. And he is ultimately going to cast the same dragon into a place of absolute, perpetual, inescapable destruction. That is a guarantee. So if we then are to be made like him, if we are to put on the mind of our Messiah, if we are to put on the mind of him, we are to take up the authority that he has given us. Behold, he has given us the keys to the kingdom. What we bind on this earth will be bound in heaven. What we loose on this earth will be loosed in heaven. He is giving us that same authority to exercise it, to act in it. He's given us an armory. Do you understand? He opens the doors and unlocks the armory. I remember very distinctly in basic training when we did not have rifles for a long time. Most people think you just get rifles and bullets and all this stuff right away. But remember, you're a civilian and you're basically dumb. You really are. You have no idea what you're doing. Even all the guys who are like, totally, I'm ready for this. Even people that think they know anything about firearms, you really don't know squat. And you realize that when somebody hands you a firearm that is so foreign to you, like an M203 grenade launcher. You can be a cool civilian dude who has some sweet firearms. I doubt you've ever shot a grenade out of a firearm. I doubt you've recently held onto a hand cannon, right, and launched a high explosive incendiary round into a target and caused a vehicle to explode recently. They're very hard to get your hands on legally-ish. Even legally-ish. You have to register it as a destructive device. Every single grenade. You can get grenades. They're just really tightly regulated, which makes it very difficult. Unless you live along border towns and you're willing to just go along with compromised government agencies and serve their dark agendas and occult groups that are trafficking narcotics, humans, and blood sacrifices. Then you can get lots of that stuff. I digress. There is a real serious armory that got opened up to us when we were in basic combat training after we had been disciplined, after we had been tested, after we had learned to stand. Like actually, my first few weeks, plural, of basic combat training involved standing. Just standing. Standing for hours. Standing for days. Standing for weeks. Just standing. And you know what happens? It was honestly one of the hardest parts of the entire time I was in training. Just standing. Standing in line. Standing on fire duty. Like standing on fire watch. Standing on guard duty. Standing all the time. Do you know how bad your feet ache? Do you know how exhausted your back gets? Your knees shake? I was 17. I was a junior in high school. I was like so full of piss and vinegar it was coming out my ears. I was like, I was ready to go all the time. And yet I was crumbling. I was losing it. I was falling apart. I was so fatigued from standing. I wasn't even walking quickly in at any time. There was nowhere to go. It was just hurry up and wait, hurry up and wait, hurry up and wait, hurry up and wait all the time. It was like, go in this line. Everyone, dissemble. Go over there. Like there was constant movement. Stay, stop, stoop. Like literally just over and over and over. Instability, then standing. Instability, standing. You didn't know what was going to happen at any given time. And it was so overwhelmingly exhausting. They did that for the first couple weeks. And then they started teaching us how to walk. Because you know what? You don't even know how to walk as a civilian. You really don't. You don't know how to walk with any kind of order in your life. You don't know how to walk with cadence, with rhythm, with precision. You don't know how to walk with consistency for long periods of time. I met people that backpack thousands of miles. You know who you are. Shout out to you, sweet awesomeness. They've walked thousands of miles. I know people that have seen more of our country with their feet and their eyes than almost any American I've ever met. And they just traveled here voluntarily to look at it. It takes so much discipline to walk rightly, to walk correctly, to stay on a specific spot and not move off of it until it is your exact moment to move. And then to not move even when really bad things potentially are coming your way. To still maintain that standing we talked about earlier. To still maintain that when everything around you is moving, when hundreds of other people around you are moving. By the end of our basic combat training, we had this graduation day. One of the ways they demonstrated the proficiency of their soldiers was showing how they could march in formation, because it's extremely hard to get a couple hundred humans to march in a straight line forward, then to make them turn, and come back in on themselves. Like, there's all these orders that have to be given and timings that have to be done and disciplined understandings within yourself about how to move, like how to do an about face that's turning around and going the other direction, and how to do that within a cadenced rhythm so that everybody does it at the same time, or some people do it at an exact different time so that nobody bumps into each other. Nobody takes what we would later get, like a murderously sharp bayonet covered rifle that's fully loaded with, remember, high explosive incendiary rounds, armor piercing ammunition. There's this armory that is someday going to be given to these soldiers, and they're going to be entrusted with an opportunity to start marching around with other humans everywhere with those kinds of firepower in their hands at their disposal. They spend weeks preparing you to get that, but then the moment comes where you finally get the opportunity, and the sergeants go in and they open up the armory. And you know those scenes in movies, because that's all you guys probably have to reference this out of, where they open up the arsenal and you're like, oh, sweet Moses, look at that. It was like that, and I mean it. There was, for me, one of my favorite firearms in the history of ever, the M2 50 caliber Browning machine gun. It's tremendous. It weighs over 80 pounds, all right? But it can fire. It's an air-cooled machine gun, meaning it doesn't need anything to cool it but the air around it. Oh my gosh. It is a thunderous cannon of such destructive force that it can send a lethal projectile that is half an inch in diameter and, like, no joke, almost 2 inches long. At such tremendous velocities, it can kill your face 2 miles away. Like, think about it. Most people can't even see 2 miles because you live in a flat place and there's trees around you. Well, suddenly out of one of those vortexes of green could come a bullet that has got high explosives inside it and incendiaries and light your face on fire as it explodes it inwards. That's destructive power. That's unbelievable precision waiting to be unleashed, right? They opened up the armory and they hand you your rifle. And it's one of these moments where you're like, oh my gosh, I have waited so long for this, right? This is my rifle. You grab that thing, and I held on to that thing, and you know what they do? They don't give you any bullets for a lot longer still. So you get like the awesome moment where you're like, yay, I got my sword. Hey, guess what? It's dull and a piece of wood. That's what they do. They basically give you a dummy rifle because you're too stupid to handle a real loaded firearm yet, remember? You can barely walk with it yet. You don't even know how to sleep with it. So they teach you how to sleep with it still without shooting your face off, because guess what? In combat, you're probably going to be sleeping with it loaded. True story. I've slept with loaded firearms under my face for years, for way too long, for way, way, way too long. It's not a good idea. And you can't just do that the rest of your life necessarily. So that's why I always recommend knives, because I never have to reload this thing. Anyways, there is such a wondrous moment when you're finally given the tools in your playbook And then you finally get to see what can happen when you can carry your rifle around. And so they start training you and disciplining you on how to move about with the rifle on your person and how to not keep that muzzle from pointing at anything you don't intend to destroy. Because out of that muzzle will come things that are so destructive, they can kill 25 people. Like one misstep can kill 25 people. Do you remember how I talked about that you can have a grenade come out of your barrel that can just explode and fragment people? Well, then you're marching in such tight quarters at certain times and intervals that if you launch a grenade into that space, like a tiny, small, confined rooms, like your dining hall. Not all dining halls are small. Some are massive caverns because they have to feed a lot of humans suddenly. But there's tiny spaces like within your barracks or the bathroom because everybody has to poop immediately after because most people are feeling sick from the 450 vaccines they just shoved into your veins. Basically, almost everybody is sick and vomiting and horrifically ill because they're poisoning all of us. But if you launch a grenade into that space and those confined corridors would send a pressure wave that would liquefy people's organs or light them on fire. Horrible stuff, right? It happens. It's called friendly fire. There's another word we had for it called blue falcon, which was a nice way of saying a horribly bad word that I'm not going to use right now. But somebody that screws their other buddy over really badly. So they don't give you the goods, really, until they've shown that you can actually walk around without dropping the thing, walk around without negligent discharges going on. This is where you pull the trigger at a time when you should not have or did not intend to necessarily. You have a lot of learning yet to do, even after you're given some of the armory. And it's the same true for you. You think you've got something in you. You think you've kind of learned some stuff, and then suddenly someone comes along in your path and slaps you upside the face with a sword that is so much sharper than yours, and you go, wow, I'm dull. Like, I feel that constantly. I think I've learned a few things in my life, and then I meet somebody who's got the scripture so sharpened up on that I'm just sitting there looking at their tattered, ribboned Bible and going, wow, I've lost my edge, man. I don't have that same interconnectivity because remember, I'm sleep deprived constantly. I've lost a lot of my edges. My wife and I are fatigued. We've known scarcity of sleep and hunger and lack. We've known a lot of that stuff. And the toil of our brow, as awesome as it is at healing me, it's also just overwhelmingly exhausting some days. And I feel that a lot. But there comes a point in time where you're finally in training and suddenly a beautiful moment happens. You demonstrate proficiency. You're tested. As you go along, all throughout this process, they keep testing you. But then all of a sudden, you are found worthy. You are approved. You are advanced. You're graduated to the next level. And you know what you're entrusted with? Greater responsibility. And you know what that came in the form of? A 30-round magazine full of 5.56 millimeter power. It was incredible. The first time I got these green-tipped bullets, I just touched them constantly. You're not supposed to take them with you outside of the firing range, but I may have been known to smuggle some in my water bottles at times because I like to drink those bullets in, son. They're so beautiful. They're delicious. I love touching them and holding them way more than I'm comfortable saying out loud and publicly, but I used to love having a few extra rounds tucked away just in case. You know what I mean? I always liked that. I've just always been one of those guys who held a few over for the end. And because of that, I always had ammunition with me. I always was ready for an opportunity in case something was needed. And it gave me a total different sense of understanding. When you are handed a loaded well, we even had a 3-round burst option on our firearm, meaning we could send 3 bullets at 3,000 feet per second into the face meat of somebody we really intended to destroy if we so desired. It was an incredible amount of power given to us. But then range day came, and they handed me an M16A1, which had full auto capabilities, meaning I could press the trigger one time rearward, and it would dispense ammunition as rapidly as possible until it had exhausted the magazine. At that time, it was a 30-round magazine, and that was incredibly fast. But then it had an M203 grenade launcher on the bottom of it. And boy howdy, when you got to go to range day and shoot off an M203, there is nothing like it. It's more like lobbing a football slowly. It doesn't come out super fast because they can't put a ton of explosive in there. It'd blow your hand apart, remember? So the back of the round just detonates this beautiful cartridge and it goes floating through the air and lobs it onto the target. It is such a shocking amount of power. When you can land that thing inside of a car window, that's generally the place you like to aim for. Front seat, ideally the driver's seat or sometimes a passenger seat. But if you land that thing inside a car window, it does such devastating thing. It blows the roof off of vehicles at times. There's plenty of videos you can kind of go see what that looks like. But it does so much incredible things when you can put it in confined spaces and detonate it. That is one of those moments for me when I got to see that. When we got to set up Claymore mines have C4, which is an incredibly high explosive with ball bearings on the front of it, okay? Ball bearings are tiny, hardened steel balls, nickel-plated a lot of times, that cover the face of this slightly curved greenish plastic block. And it's got words written on it that say, front towards the enemy. And that's really important because if you don't go on that side of it, you might be somewhat okay-ish. But if you go on the front side of that thing, you will definitely die. Guaranteed. Because hundreds of ball bearings coming out at super fast speeds are going to wither your soul away. We got to use AT-4 rocket launchers, which is an anti-tank rocket launcher that shoots out a cartridge of a rocket that has a shaped charge of explosive in it, meaning the explosives are shaped like almost like a V, so that when it goes into the front of like a tank, what it does is it creates superheated chunk of copper that penetrates, makes a molten hole into the tank armor, and it can penetrate 18 inches of solid armor. Think about that. 18 inches? Most people don't have trees 18 inches wide. This thing could go through hardened steel that was 18 inches thick and then shoot molten hot copper inside there and burn everybody to death in it. True story. It happens constantly when you're in a wartime scenario. There is such mighty firepower that began to get unleashed to us because we showed proficiency with it. And it is so awesome when you demonstrate that kind of proficiency because you can be continued to be entrusted with greater and greater and greater opportunities to do mightier things. There came a point, though, where you suddenly realize, I am unwieldy with this much firepower. There's guys that are shooting tank cartridges, okay? Like the Abrams tank shoots a depleted, it's a 120 millimeter cannon. Like it's a 120 millimeter bore size. And it shoots a projectile with such lethality and precision. They're shooting targets miles away with depleted uranium stabilized, meaning it's not even like a bullet. It's just like a dart of depleted uranium. It's one of the hardest, densest, heaviest potential objects ever. And it comes out of there with such a velocity that when it enters into hardened steel or other targets, it actually sharpens itself as it goes inside other stuff. Most metal, when it hits other metal, dulls itself. Uranium gets sharper as it goes in more. Think about that. Devastating power. Then there's other guys who fly planes that drop bombs that are so explosive. They can penetrate down inside the earth and go through the ground meters, tons of meters, and then blow up things that were designed to withstand bombs dropped on them. They can go, they're called bunker busting bombs. Unbelievable. We have munitions that cause an explosion to vaporize fuel, like fuel air, like they cause fuel to be dispersed and vaporized into the air, and then they ignite that, and it explodes that and causes such a pressure wave that it'll erupt and kill everything in a certain kind of radius, but it's really good for caves and tunnels. See, we use that a lot in Afghanistan. We'll use that a lot here, I'm sure, but that's for different reasons. But what I'm getting at is that you need to recognize that that is a hierarchy of power that can be entrusted to you in the United States military. The authorized power of what we're reading about in the Sword of the Covenant makes that stuff look like garbage. It's abysmally weak, and I mean that because I've seen the power of the living Elohim through these testimonies put the mightiest armies that the world had ever known to shame. Like, do you remember when Egypt went after the Israelites and they crossed the Red Sea? Pharaoh's army was like the United States military, all of it, coming after you. And then it got drowned in a moment. Like one moment. It takes decades. It takes hundreds of years to establish that kind of lethality in a unit, in a military force. Look at the Navy. Oh my goodness, nuclear-powered submarines and aircraft carriers. I study submarines a lot because they're just unbelievable. How would I try to take over a submarine? You know, like I think about these kinds of things. How do you want ultimate firepower? I want to explore tunnels, right? And the bathyspheric tunnel systems in the earth. I need a nuclear powered submarine is what I've realized. And there are these hot boats, which are where the special forces boats go, and like all the special forces guys that go and do the secret scary stuff that never happens anywhere. They do all this stuff on nuclear powered submarines at times, and they literally get launched out of missile tubes. And it's just a whole other level of firepower and destructive capabilities. Like 18 independently targetable nuclear warheads that come out of a single cartridge underwater where they've been hiding for 6 months. What? It's unreal. There's so much firepower in those systems, and yet I've seen that the keys, none of those pale in comparison to what the dragon had in his power, which was death and Hades. Death and Hades are the guys who I think give spiritual downloads to humans who do their will in order to create devices like that. They have been rendered powerless because the one who has given them, taken that power, has instead given that to us. He has authorized us the armory that opens up, like in Ephesians 6, when you see, having done all of these things, having stand, therefore, with your feet shod in the preparation of the gospel of shalom, like the breastplate of righteousness, faith, and hope upon your chest, with the helmet of salvation and hope upon your head. Like there's this armory that is unleashed to us, that is available to us if we would walk in the covenant with our commander, if we would walk with him like Joshua walked with him, kept his eyes forward, fixed on the prize, and the commander of the heavenly host met with him and gave him specific downloads of information on how to destroy the strongholds that had been planted there by the dragon, by the architects of evil, by the systems of man, to make sure that the people of Elohim never got a chance to take their inheritance. But you know what? That same thing is happening. The stirring in the body. There's a sifting that's taking place. And what's going to come out of it is the remnant, is those that are equipped, who take hold of the promises, who seize upon the covenants that they have with their commander, and they boldly go forth and take the land. They seize with violence those spiritual strongholds that are within and without, and they destroy and render powerless he who was the one who once had the power over death, that was the dragon, because they walk with their Gibborim. He goes before them and prepares the land before them. I want you to be filled with that same boldness. I want you to have that same girded up desire within yourself to take mightily the words that you have been given and to go boldly forth in peace, believing that he will give it to you. Do you want to know why I know these things? Because he put this in my hand. This, to me, was more powerful of a tool in my armory than any weapon I was ever given in the United States military. This was better than the grenade that I was handed. This was better than the launcher that it came out of. This is better than the beautiful M249 Bravo machine gun, belt-fed, fantastic 7.62 millimeter, fully automatic, air-cooled machine gun. This was far more power. This will be more powerful. I will do more with this than I ever did with any of those tools I was ever handed, because this is a stone of testimony. This is my rock of offense to others, and to others it is a rock of deliverance. If you haven't watched Nature Nate recently, watch it. It's so powerful, and you'll see where this stone came out of. This is called a celt. It's an Indian axe head. Some guy thousands of years ago, or maybe a couple hundred years ago, I don't know, because it's stone, remember? Some human got this rock that is so hard and so dense, it weighs more than a grenade. It's unbelievably dense. And he sanded this thing, likely on sandstone, for so long, for potentially months, because it takes me 8 to 10 hours to resharpen an edge on one knife. This is stone, remember, with stone. Somebody dedicated themselves to that for an enormous period of time. They sharpened the edges of this thing to make it able to do work in a unique and set-apart way. And you know what? I prayed to my King and my Creator to entrust to me a treasure, and he handed me this while I was with my wife and my daughters, after I had labored for months. Like, I don't ever get paid for being a laborer on these farms. I get paid with food. I'm given the food of my toil. That's it. I am blessed to have that and the experience and the wisdom that they are teaching and sharing with me. I am paid instead when he hands me things like this. This is my inheritance that he entrusts to me. My wife and my daughters and I had spent months laboring on a farm. And when I left there, I went to a river and I went with my whole family and I prayed he would give me a treasure while I was with my family so that my daughters, my wife, and I could see the testimony that would be risen up out of that. To me, this is that. It is an answer to prayer, and I will speak of it and I will carry it forth for the rest of my life because I know the one who has given me a life out of the death I was given, who transferred me out of the kingdom of darkness and has translated me into the kingdom of his dear Son. I have a new authority that has been authorized to me. I have new weapons that are not carnal, but are mighty through Elohim to the pulling down of strongholds. That is this. That is this living word. That is these rocks of testimony. And that is the sword that comes out of my mouth because he is transforming me. And I know he will do the same to you. I pray and hope every day that you would be disciplined in your life, that you would pass the test, that you would show what is in your heart, whether you want to do good and keep his commandments or whether you want to curse him and follow after the powerless, yet still powerful dragon that we contend with. Be fierce for the cause that which you have been called. I hope that you be vigilant out there. I hope you be on guard out there. I hope you stay safe out there. And by that, I mean live as dangerously as possible every single day of your life because the days are evil, but you were born for such a time as this. I love you. Be faithful always, even unto death. If you like what this was about, if this offended you tremendously, I think it's good. And I hope more of what we have to say offends you tremendously. But I pray that you recognize the source of many of where these words come from. It's not just my lips. I hope you will share it out to those that you think so. And if you would like to, look at the links below. I'll love you. I'll talk to you soon.